Hey guys, let's get straight to the point. So today we're going to show you how to update your Sony mirrorless camera. To be honest with you, as a Fujifilm user, this process is much more complicated than the Fujifilm camera's update process. But let's get straight into it. So what you need to do before you start updating your firmware on your camera is to check the firmware version of your camera first. So if you're on the latest version, then you don't need to do the update. So all you need to do is to go into the menu of your camera. Depends on the version or depends on the model of your camera. I have a Sony A7IV here, so I have the latest menu system here. But it's always gonna be inside the suitcase icon, and you just need to go down to where it says setup option, and you will see inside version that my camera body is running version 1.0, and the latest firmware that Sony published is 1.0.1, improving the eye autofocus and some bug fixing. So I do need to update this firmware right here. So check the firmware version of your camera before you start doing anything. And the next step is to turn off the camera and take out all your SD cards, because you don't really need an SD card to update your firmware, which is different from Fujifilm cameras, because Fujifilm cameras, you just need to use a formatted SD card to update the firmware. This is to protect your data on your SD card not being erased during the process. The next thing you need to make sure is have a fully charged battery inside your camera. Sony's website suggests that you have at least 3 bars out of 4 of battery life inside your camera, but I charged my camera to 100% just in case, because you don't want the camera to die or the battery to die during the firmware update. So make sure that you have a fully charged battery, take out the SD cards, and now let's jump straight into the computer to download the software to update the firmware. This is the annoying part because it requires you to download 2 files basically. One is the Sony camera driver for either Mac or Windows PC. I have a Mac computer here, so I downloaded the Mac version on the Sony website. What you need to do is to go to sony.com and search for your camera model and search for the latest firmware. And inside the latest firmware page, you will be shown with the firmware update software that it's required, which is the whatever Sony camera driver installer. That is super hard to remember. So download that and install it on your Mac computer. I have it open already. So I'm just gonna install it. It will take a minute or 2 to install this camera driver. This is for you to install the firmware onto the camera. So this is not the firmware itself. You also need to download the firmware, which is 1.01 for my A7IV. It is definitely taking a lot longer than I expected. Hopefully it's not stuck on this page. So what happened right now is the system extension block is showing up because of the security preferences on the Mac computer. What you need to do is to open the security preferences and allow this process to go through, which is kind of weird. I don't know why. What you need to do here is to unlock this tiny little lock thing at the bottom, punch in your password again, click unlock, and it will say system software from developer Sony image products and solution was blocked from loading. So you just need to allow it, which is really weird. And I'm just going to lock this back. Once you allow that or authorize that process to go through, it will continue the process of installing the software to install the firmware. So once this is done, I can move that file that I download to trash because I don't need it anymore. So once that driver is done installing, you will not see an app in your launcher or anywhere desktop. So it's not an app, it's just a driver, which is super confusing because Mac computer, usually they don't really require drivers, or at least like it's not done like manually like this. What you need to do after installing the driver is to actually open the firmware that you download, which is this one right here, the A7 Mark IV version 101.dmg file, and it should open through that installer. So right here, I have the system software updater. Just open this up and it will ask you if you want to open it because it's from the internet. So you have to open it in order to update the firmware. It's asking you to turn on your camera, go into the menu, go into the suitcase again, and look for USB right here, and USB connection mode. Click onto it and select mass storage MSC. That's the option you want to set up for firmware update. You don't want to go to the default one, which is select when connect. You can choose that back once you finish updating the firmware, but you have to choose the mass storage MSC. I don't know why there's a C there, then it's just mass storage MSC. Once this is selected, you will be using the Sony camera cable that comes with the camera. They suggest using this. I highly recommend you to follow the instruction and use this cable because I don't know how other USB-C or USB cable will affect the firmware update. You don't want the process to have any hiccups and break your camera. So use the authentic original cable. And just plug it into your computer first. And keep your camera on. And let me open up the port. Just plug in the USB-C or the micro USB if your camera uses micro USB. So once this is connected to the computer, you'll do this, and okay, this is just a promotion for the app. So that's okay. So now the screen of the camera will say USB mode mass storage, which is the mode that the computer wants. On the computer, you just need to click on next, and it will detect the current version of your camera firmware and compare it to the update that you have, which is 1.00 on the camera and 1.01 on the firmware that I downloaded. Now just click on next, and it will automatically reset the camera. Now make sure that you don't power off the camera or unplug the battery or take out the battery, because it will mess up the process of the firmware update. You never want to do that. It's just like a computer. If the power dies during the update, then there will be a big problem. You might break your computer or your camera. In this case, like, you don't want this to happen. And this process will take some time. So let's hope for the best and see how long it will take, because it's updating the firmware. The Sony website actually says that it will take up to half an hour, which is kind of ridiculous, to be honest with you, because a Fujifilm camera firmware update, no matter how big the firmware update is, it will maximum take like 5 minutes, and it requires just having the file installed or copied to the SD card and plug it in to your camera, and then just power on the camera to do the firmware update, instead of having this like computer cable, download, installer, driver, firmware update, like click yes and no and option and stuff. So this is definitely much more complicated, and I don't really enjoy doing this. But this firmware for the A7IV is really important because of the IAF issues that people have been having, which is the eye autofocus that is kind of like back or front focus for a lot of people when they're doing portrait photographies with the human eye detection turned on. So this is something that I want to update as well, so I can use the camera to its like full potential. And of course, this is to show you guys how to do a firmware update as well. So now let's skip this part, skip the wait, and I'll show you guys what happened after the firmware has been installed onto the camera. Hey guys, we are back. The firmware update did take almost half an hour to go from the computer to the camera. Now the process is completed, and on the computer screen you will see that it says the update process has been completed. This is really, really annoying and ridiculous. Updating a camera firmware for half an hour. Maybe the update is extremely big. I really don't understand, but this process is definitely not as quick and easy as any other cameras that I've used before, like Panasonic, Blackmagic. Even Blackmagic it's easier, and especially Fujifilm cameras, it is much, much, much easier on those cameras. But after the firmware update anyway, on your camera screen, it will show you this page right here, the advertisement of the app. But anyway, this is because the computer restarted the camera. You just need to press OK, and what you need to do is to just turn off the camera, and you should be able to use the latest firmware on your camera. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the camera, unplug the USB cable so it's not in the USB mass storage kind of page. And what I would suggest you to do, of course, is to turn on your camera, go into the menu and check. Okay, let's switch this option first, a USB connection mode, flip it back to select when connect, and go into the suitcase menu page and go to setup option and version. Now the camera body of my A7IV is running firmware version 1.01. That's it. That's how you update the firmware on a Sony camera body. Let us know what you think in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.